So hello everybody and welcome to this knowledge pool session, which is a continuation session on our module of activity-based planning. So I'll just start our presentation deck up. And got that. I'll just start sharing my screen. Okay, so you're seeing the screen there on the critical path method. Yeah, so this is where we got to in the session last week. We were talking about the critical path method developed in 1956 by these two companies, and it's a method that would determine how long any given set of dependent tasks will take. And that's exactly what we need to do if we're trying to estimate how long a project is going to take if we plan the project as a series of dependent tasks, which is what we do with activity-based planning. So critical path method lies at the heart of most project management software. Anything that is trying to schedule tasks and activities and building products is going to use the critical path method at its heart. And we have got a module on critical path method, but we'll move on and we'll talk briefly about something called PERT. PERT is project evaluation and review technique. And around the same time that critical path method was developed in the industry, PERT was developed by the US Navy. And both techniques are trying to do a similar thing. They're trying to predict how long a project will take. But PERT differs from CPM in that it actually uses statistics to try to predict a range of durations for the project. It uses a similar approach to the analysis of the tasks, but it requires data about how long similar projects have taken in the past, and it uses that data and its statistical techniques to predict a range of durations for the project. So not one duration, which is what CPM would tell you. CPM will tell you that the project's going to take 7 days or 3 weeks or 25 months, whatever the answer is. Whereas PERT will tell you a range of durations, a range of likely durations based on previous projects. So it might say, well, this project looks like it will take between 2 and 3 months or between 7 and 8 weeks. The problem with PERT is that actually identifying similar business projects and finding useful data about them can be difficult. So the method itself is rarely used, although PERT diagrams, which were part of the technique, are often used to draw the dependencies between tasks when we're performing an analysis using critical path method. So the diagrams that were part of PERT are very useful actually if we're using CPM. And the two techniques are, as I say, aimed at doing the same thing. They're aimed at telling you how long a project is going to take, either as one answer or a range of answers in the case of PERT. So we can now talk about where activity-based planning fits in our project lifecycle. And what we can say is that activity-based planning can take place any time that a plan needs to be created. Thus, activity-based planning will start early in the initiation stage, because one of the things that we need to do in the initiation stage is make sure that all of the tasks and all of the deliverables required in initiation are completed. So the project manager will normally create a small activity-based plan for the initiation stage to make sure that all the tasks required in that stage actually happen. It'll also be the case that completing activity-based planning will be a major focus of the planning stage. As you'd expect, during the planning stage, we carry out most of our planning. So by the end of the planning stage, we should have an activity-based plan that is complete and fully resourced. So what we mean by fully resourced is we know how many people we need to undertake each task. And then during the delivery stage and close down stage, the project manager will use the project plan to track the progress of the project, and will only update the plan to record progress and the completion of tasks. So during delivery, we shouldn't really be finding new tasks that need doing and adding them to the plan. That's an ideal world. In reality, new tasks do become apparent as you go through delivery, and you will occasionally find that you have to add to a project plan that was supposed to be complete at the end of the planning stage. So basically, activity-based planning takes place really throughout the project. But during delivery and close down, we're really just monitoring the plan. We're not actively building it and changing it. We're just monitoring the progress of the project using the plan. So that's where activity-based planning fits in the life cycle. And we've got an assignment for you. So assignment 1 at the start of the sessions on project management was to identify a common project that you might do at home. And one of the common answers to assignment 1 was a special birthday party. So your assignment is going to be to start planning a special birthday party using activity-based planning. So we'd like you to identify the main tasks that need to be completed to prepare for the party. And then we'd like you to break down those major tasks into smaller and smaller tasks until you have 3 levels. And you should also stop when you have a total of 16 tasks. So you need to practice activity-based planning, but once you've started to decompose or break down the tasks, there isn't much point going beyond 16, because by the time you've done this 7 or 8 times, you'll start to understand the process. So can you think about the main tasks, break those main tasks down into smaller tasks, and then smaller tasks again until you have 3 levels of tasks. Stop when you have a total of 16 tasks. And then for each task, estimate the time that the lowest level task will take to complete. The time that the higher level task will take will just be the sum of all the lower level tasks that feed into it. And then if you could also identify the dependencies between each of the low-level tasks. And I'd like you to present the information in a table as shown over leaf, and we'll go to that shortly. Apologies, I've not updated the deadline for this. The deadline for this assignment is going to be this time next week. So we can say that it's going to be the 10th of November at 7 p.m. And this is the table. So in this table, I've created a number of columns. The first column is for the task ID. And you'll see here that I've only got 7 tasks. What your assignment will have is 16 task IDs. And what you'll need to do is, in the level 1 task, which is the second column, put in the most important tasks that you can identify when planning a special birthday party. So that might be things like building a guest list, building a menu, things like that. And then you need to break that task down into a number of lower level tasks, which you'll put into column 3, which is called L2 task. And then those L2 tasks, you'll break those down to a lower level of detail and put the resulting tasks into the fourth column, which is called L3 task. Then to complete the assignment, you'll need to estimate how long each of the lowest level tasks will take. So you can see, for example, that actually the level 2 task of surveying the bridge site doesn't actually break down into any level 3 tasks. So the estimate has been put on the level 2 task. Where we have the activity to design the bridge to suit the site conditions, that level 2 task has been broken down into 3 level 3 tasks. So we've put an estimate against each of those level 3 tasks. And then the final column is for the predecessor task. And what needs to go in there is the task ID of the task that needs to be complete before the low level task can start. So if we look at the task that has task ID 4, which is design roadway and determine load on structure, that task can't start until task ID 2 has been completed. So we have to have surveyed the bridge site before we can design the roadway and determine the load on the structure. In a similar way, task ID 5 can't start until task 4 has been completed. Task 6 can't start until task 5 has been completed. So it's only those tasks that are not broken down into smaller tasks that should have an estimate and predecessor. So task 4 isn't broken down further. That's the lowest level that we have. So we have an estimate and a predecessor for task 4. Task 2 isn't broken down at all. So we have an estimate and a predecessor for task 2, even though it's at level 2. Because some tasks just don't break down. Some tasks are at their lowest level. And what you need to practice is the idea of identifying the major tasks within your project, breaking those down where it makes sense to break them down, and not breaking them down where they're already at their lowest level. So that's the assignment. Are there any questions about the assignment? Okay, so we are recording this. I actually forgot to post last week's recording on YouTube, so I've made a note already to post this recording and the recording from last week onto YouTube. That'll be done tomorrow, so you'll be able to go back over this assignment briefing tomorrow on YouTube to just refresh your memory as to what the assignment is. Okay, and if you do need help with it, I'm very happy to help via Telegram. So just ask any questions you need to on Telegram. Okay, so that's the assignment, and this is quite a tricky assignment to do when you've not had any practice at doing this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do an exercise. I'm going to do that together so that you can see how activity-based planning works in practice. And the exercise we're going to do is based around this scenario. So the scenario is that your boss at work is thirsty and they want a cup of tea. They've asked you for a cup of tea with milk and sugar. And we're going to take delivering this as a project, and we're going to plan the delivery of a cup of tea for your boss using activity-based planning. So there are some further details. Your workplace is in a town centre with various shops and cafes nearby. It also has a kitchen with a kettle and a fridge, and everybody contributes into a tea club that makes sure that there are tea bags, sugar and milk available in the kitchen at all times. And there are no drinks vending machines that are on site. So that's the scenario. Anyone got any questions about the scenario? Okay. So the first thing that we'll need to do in any project is decide on our approach to the project. And you typically decide that during the initiation stage. And the list of tasks that we need to define will be very different depending on the approach we take. So if we decide to make a cup of tea in the kitchen, the tasks on our project plan will be very different to if we decide to go and buy a cup of tea from a cafe. Both approaches are equally valid. Both will deliver a cup of tea with milk and sugar to the boss. So we have that flexibility to decide on our approach. The one thing you can't do is you can't get tea from a vending machine because this approach isn't available to you because the scenario says there are no vending machines on the site. So what we're going to do is, for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to say that we're going to make the tea in the kitchen at work. And what I've done to speed it along is I've made a list of the activities that we need to make a cup of tea. Now, the first thing we're going to need to make a cup of tea is boiling water. Yeah, so we're going to need to boil some water. So I'm making a note, boil water. What else do we need to do? Well, we need a cup plus a tea bag. And we're going to add the boiling water to the cup and tea bag. And then we're going to add sugar. After a period of waiting, add sugar and milk. Stir and then deliver to boss. So there are basically 5 major tasks there that we need to achieve. We need to boil some water. We need to get a cup and tea bag together. We need to add the boiling water to the cup and let the tea brew. We need to add sugar and milk and stir it, and we need to deliver it to the boss. We've said that in activity-based planning, having identified these major tasks, what we then need to do is break those tasks down. So if we're going to boil water, what do we need to do? Well, we need to fill the kettle and flick the switch on. So boiling the water breaks down into filling the kettle, turning it on. The cup and the tea bag we need, that breaks down into getting the cup from wherever that can be found. Maybe it's in the dishwasher, maybe it's in a cupboard, but we need to get the cup. The next thing we need to do is get a tea bag and put the tea bag into the teacup. Once we've got our boiling water from the earlier step, we can add the boiling water to the cup and wait. So that major task of adding the water breaks down into add water and wait. Adding the sugar, adding the milk, stirring, that task breaks down into 3 tasks: add sugar, add milk, and stir, and then deliver to the boss. That doesn't really break down at all because we've got our cup. We just need to deliver it. So those are our tasks. And what I wanted to show you is how this would look like in a piece of typical project management software. So what I've done is I've prepared our list of tasks that we need to do, and I've put them into a file format where we can open them with this free tool called Gantt Project. So these are the basic tasks that I'd identified, which was we need to fill the kettle, otherwise we can't boil it. We need to get the cup, get the tea bag, put the tea bag in the cup, add the boiled water to the cup, wait. I've also got a step here where we need to remove the tea bag from the cup. I forgot that bit. And then we need to add milk, add sugar, stir, and give the cup of tea to the boss. And there's a spelling error there, of course, isn't there? Got team on the brain. So they're the activities that form the basis of our project plan. And you'll notice that all of these activities, they all have a verb at the start of them. So they say like fill kettle, get cup, wait, add, remove, stir, give. So because we're doing activity-based planning, all of our activities have a verb at the front of them. And activity-based planning is quite easy to do yourself if you're familiar with the tasks and you can visualize the steps required. But in business, it's often the case that when you're planning a project, you're not familiar with all of the tasks that are needed, and you require subject matter experts, SMEs, to bring their familiarity with the tasks into the planning process. So we have to think now about what dependencies we have. So you'll notice that as well as having a name, each of these tasks already has an ID, 1 through 12. And you'll notice that these tasks all start on the same day on our calendar. If you look in the center of the screen, you'll see it says April 2020, and the number 1 just beneath that means the 1st of April. So at the moment, every task is starting on the same day. The way we're going to use this particular tool, because it doesn't allow us to plan by the minute, which is actually how long this project is going to take. This project is going to take a matter of minutes rather than a matter of days. What we're going to do is we're going to imagine that each of the numbers in April don't represent days, they represent minutes. And that's just to help us with this simple exercise. So if we want to show, for example, that boiling the kettle takes 3 minutes, we need to set the duration of the task to 3 minutes. So what we'll do is we click on boiling the kettle. We click on this information button here, which is the task properties. And you can see that we have a duration field here where we can set the duration to 3. And if I click OK, oops, okay. So for some reason, the duration of 3 has been set on task 12, which wasn't my intention. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to try selecting task 2 again. Click on task properties. This does say boil kettle. I'm going to select a duration of 3, click OK, and now we've got the result we wanted. Can I just check, are you hearing me at the moment? Because I just heard a beep on my headset.
Yes, we can hear you, Tony.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so let's say that waiting for the tea to brew is going to take 2 minutes. So we'll select task 7, and we'll set the duration to 2 minutes there. So you can see how these task bars on the Gantt chart are getting longer when we increase the duration of the task. So we're going to say that everything else, all the other tasks like filling the kettle, getting the tea bag, getting the cup, etc., all the other tasks we're going to say are going to take a minute. Only boiling the kettle and waiting for the tea to brew are going to take longer than 1 minute. So we can default the duration of the other tasks to 1, just to save some time. But on a real project, you would have to consider each task in turn, think about the duration, and if you're using a software tool like this tool, you'd have to set the task duration on each task, as you saw me do. But we've now got all our task durations. What we need to do now is consider the task dependencies. So we need to think about, when can we start task 1? Well, task 1 is the very first task that we need to do.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, what happens if there are 2 tasks that could be done at the same time?
Sure.
For example, we have the tea bag and the tea bag and we have the tea bag and the cup in the same cabinet. So we'll just go there, pick them one instead of 1 minute each.
Sure. Okay. So this comes down to then understanding how much resource you have and how long it will take that resource to do the work. For example, if there are 2 of you in your team and you are both in the kitchen together, perhaps having a break, but also making a tea for your boss, one of you could get the cup, one of you could get the tea bag, and you could do the work twice as quickly if you had more resource. So the question comes, even though tasks can be done at the same time, the question is, do you have enough resource to do them at the same time? And what I'm going to say is, and this is a slightly false example here, but what I'm going to say is that because this tool only allows us to plan in whole days, we're going to treat those whole days as whole minutes. So I'm going to say that no task can take less than 1 minute. Now we know in reality it doesn't take a minute to get a cup from a shelf, and it doesn't take a minute to get a tea bag. But for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to say that no task can take less than 1 minute. Is that okay? So we'll say no task can take less than 1 minute. Now, if tasks have to take 1 minute, we're also going to say that there's only one person that is making this tea. And we're going to say that this person can't work on more than one thing at once. And these are the sorts of things that if you're planning a real project, you need to understand. Can people work on more than one thing at once? Can they do that if the task needs their full attention? So what we're going to say for this example is that tasks can't take less than a minute. There's only one resource, and that one resource can't do more than one thing at once. So what that means at the moment is that our plan is basically invalid at the moment, because we have got more than one task being done in that same minute, in that same first minute. And because we haven't shown any dependencies, our plan won't work, because this shows that we are going to remove the tea bag from the cup at the end of the first minute, but the kettle hasn't even boiled. until we've waited 3 minutes. So this plan doesn't work at the moment, and it won't work until we consider the dependencies. So let's do that, and you'll see how your question is answered. It's a good question. Thank you for it. So if we think about when we can start task 1, well, task 1 is the first task that we would do. We could start that at any time, and we can't really do much else until we've got the kettle and some boiling water. So we'll say that task 1 isn't dependent on anything. It can start immediately. But for us to boil the kettle has to be filled. So there is a dependency there where task 2 is dependent on task 1 having been finished. And the way that this particular tool allows you to set your dependencies is if I click on task 2 and I click on these same task properties icon, you'll see at the top of the page there is a predecessors tab. If I click on that predecessor tab, I can add a task and I can select the task name out of all the task names, and the task is going to be dependent on filling the kettle. So what we're saying here is that task 2 is dependent on task 1. And if I click OK, you'll see that the software adds a little arrow to show the dependency. This is now showing that task 2 can't start until task 1 has been completed. And because it can't start until task 1 has been completed, it puts the arrow on, but it also pushes the Gantt chart bar out so that boiling the kettle starts in the 2nd minute and goes through to the 5th minute. And this is how this particular tool shows dependencies. Now, getting the cup isn't actually dependent on filling the kettle, but because we can't have the one resource we have doing 2 things at once, we're going to add a dependency to show that getting the cup has to wait until filling the kettle is done. Now we're only doing this not because getting the cup is actually is really dependent on filling the kettle. It's just we have a resource constraint that means we can't get the cup until the resource that we have is free to do some work. So we're going to select Get Cup, go into the task properties, and we're going to add a dependency, and we're going to say it's dependent on task 1 again. And you can see that this has pushed task 3 out so that it's being done in the 2nd minute of the project when the resource is free. Because one of the attributes of boiling the kettle is that boiling the kettle doesn't require the resource to stand over the kettle and watch it and wait for it to boil. We're going to imagine, for the purpose of the exercise, that we have an automatic kettle. So while we're waiting for the water to boil, we can be getting the cup. Once that's done, the resource is then free to do something else. And the next task that needs doing is getting the tea bag. So we would say that getting the tea bag is dependent on getting the cup, not because it's really dependent on it, but just because that's the first point at which the resource becomes free in order to work on this. The answer would be different if you had more resources. If you had somebody else that could be getting the tea bag while the first resource was getting the cup, you wouldn't make task 4 dependent on task 3. It could start earlier than that. Okay. So the next task we need to think about is task 5. And you'll see that we still have some time while the kettle is boiling when our resource isn't doing anything. So we can say that task 5, putting the tea bag into the cup, is just dependent on having the tea bag and having the cup. And the simplest way to show that is to add a dependency on getting the tea bag, because getting the tea bag is already dependent on getting the cup. So if we've got the tea bag, we must already have the cup. So we can put the tea bag into the cup. Now you'll see at the end of minute 5 in our project, the kettle has boiled and we have a tea bag in a cup ready for the boiling water to be added. But what we should do is when we add the dependencies for task 6, we should make sure that we add the dependency of needing boiled water, but also of needing the tea bag to be in the cup. Because we can't add the boiling water to the cup with its tea bag until we have all of those things. We need the cup, we need the tea bag in the cup, we need the boiled water. And one of the reasons that we do that, the reason why we add the two dependencies, is that things in the project may change. We may find, for example, that we have a slow kettle, and we may find that we need to change the duration of boiling the water to 4. And you'll see that if I change the duration to 4, click OK, the duration of task 2 gets longer, but also because task 6 is dependent on task 2, it's pushed out the point at which task 6 can start. Because boiling the water is going to take longer, we can't add the water to the cup until the kettle's boiled. And this is one of the advantages of using computer software for project management, is that when the project plan changes, the software can change things for you more quickly and more easily than you can if you were doing this on paper. So I'm going to change that duration back to 3, and you'll see that automatically, because that task has got shorter, the software has adjusted when task 6 can start to the optimum point, which is after minute 5. Now we need to think about the next task, which is waiting for the tea to brew. That's going to be dependent on us having added hot water to the cup. So we go into predecessors and add that dependency of adding hot water to the cup. Click OK. And you can see that that task now starts after the 6 minutes and takes 2 minutes while we wait for the tea to brew. And we just follow on in this fashion, identifying the dependencies between the tasks. So removing the tea bag from the cup, well, we don't want to do that until we've allowed enough time for the tea to brew. So the dependency here is on waiting for the tea to brew. So we can remove the tea from the cup. Once the tea bag is out, we can then add the sugar. Once the sugar's in, we can add the milk. So the predecessor to adding the milk is adding the sugar. And when we come to add the dependencies for stirring the tea, I'm going to add two dependencies. So I'm going to say that stirring the tea needs both the milk and the sugar to be added before we can stir the tea. So you'll see that we've got 2 arrows that come in to stir the tea. One from adding the milk, one from adding the sugar. Because of course we could reorder. There's no particular reason that we would add the sugar before the milk. It's just the order that the tasks appeared in our task list. We could reorder these, but I've added those two dependencies because, again, in a real project, if the task of adding the milk, we suddenly find that we have to go out and buy some milk. If that suddenly changes to be 10 minutes because we need to go out, you can see that that task, that extension of the task, pushes out the task. Let's just try and bring that out. So try and bring that in rather. So if I change that duration for adding the milk to 2, you can see how it's pushed out stirring the tea. And similarly, if we were to change the duration on adding the sugar, that would also push out stirring the tea if the extension was more than 2 more minutes. So at the moment, adding sugar takes 1 minute. If we change this so that it takes 3 minutes, that doesn't actually move the yeah, it does. It moves out the task. If we make adding the sugar longer, it moves out adding the milk because of this arrow here. So we'll put this adding the milk back to 1. And the final thing is, once we've stirred the tea, we can give the cup of tea to the boss. So giving the cup of tea to the boss has a predecessor. The predecessor is stirring the tea. And so that's the dependencies for the project that we've been planning. Right, okay. So what we're seeing here is a viable project plan for making a cup of tea for our boss, planned using activity-based planning. So you can see that we developed our list of all the tasks that needed doing. We estimated how long each task would take, and then we worked out what the predecessors are using information both about our resource knowledge, so knowing how much resource we have, and that may change if you have more resource available. So say we went to our boss and said, we've planned your project and your tea is going to take 13 minutes before we can bring it to you. The boss may say, well, that's too long. I want my tea in 10 minutes. So you'd have to come back to your plan and see whether you can improve on this by perhaps bringing more resource in. Because if you can bring more resource in, then you haven't got the resource dependencies that mean that, for example, get tea bag and put tea bag in cup can't be done at the same time. So this is an example of using the software tools that are typically available for projects to plan a project using activity-based planning. What we'll do quickly is we'll just take a look at the PERT chart for this project. So we mentioned the PERT chart previously, but we haven't actually seen a PERT chart yet. So if I click on the PERT chart here, this shows you what the PERT chart looks like. And it's basically a flow through the project. And it starts with filling the kettle. And you can see the duration of filling the kettle is 1. After the kettle's filled, We then boil the kettle, but the resource is also free because boiling the kettle doesn't require the resource to wait with the kettle. The resource is then free to get the cup, get the tea bag, put the tea bag in the cup, but only once we have boiling water can we add the boiling water to the cup. Everything then basically has to come to a halt while we wait for the tea to brew. We then remove the tea bag, add the sugar, add the milk, stir the tea, and deliver the cup of tea to the boss. So that's what the PERT chart looks like. If we look at the resource chart, what I need to do here is I need to add a new resource. Let's say this resource is called team member. Now, what I can do is on each of these tasks, I can go to the task properties and I can say who the resource is that's going to work on this. And we just have one resource. Don't know whether, I can't remember if this particular tool allows me to make multiple changes at once. I don't think it does. So I'll quickly go through and add these resources. Just bear with me while I do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the, no, we don't have a resource on. Should have a resource there. I'm going to take the resource off boiling the kettle. Because boiling the kettle doesn't actually need the resource. The resource is free to do other things. Also, waiting for the tea to brew doesn't require a resource. So we've got no resource on waiting for the tea to brew. But removing the tea bag from the cup does need resource. I think the sugar needs resource. I'm having a slight problem just selecting the tasks, add milk, resource, add. So now, all of the tasks apart from boil kettle and wait for tea to brew have resource assigned to them. And one of the things we can do in this particular tool, and this is quite common to project management software, is we can look at resource utilization. So if I click on the resource chart, what this is showing me is that the resource is fully utilised up to the end of minute 5, start of minute 6, and then there's a 2-minute break while we wait for the tea to brew, and then the resource is fully utilised until the tea is delivered. If you remember, there's no resource assigned to boiling the kettle. If we do assign a resource to boiling the kettle, I'll just show you what happens. So we can say that boiling the kettle needs a resource. If we now look at the resource chart, you'll see we have this red on it, and we have 200%. And that basically means that because we've got the resource assigned to boil the kettle, which takes 3 minutes, and we've also got 3 other tasks that resource is also assigned to do in minutes 2, 3, and 4, that resource is overcommitted. They're being asked to do too much. And this is how this particular tool shows you if you've scheduled tasks when you don't have enough resource to do them all at once. It will give you this red on this resource chart so that you can see that your resource is overcommitted, that you're asking people to do too much. So you'll see if, for example, if I go to one of those tasks, this task here, say, getting the tea bag, if I take the resource off that, so we're now saying, well, this doesn't need any resource. If we now look at the resource chart, you'll see that there's no overcommitment in the 3rd minute because that task now no longer requires resource, but boiling the kettle does. And we can expand this so you can actually see the task. So where you've got this overlap between get the cup and boil the kettle, that's what's creating this 200% utilization for that team member. You haven't got 200% here because we took the resource out of putting the tea bag in the cup. Sorry, we took the team member resource out of getting the sugar. So because he's not getting the sugar, he's fully available to stand watching the kettle boil. So we've seen this essential concept about resource overcommitment that can happen when you plan for one person to be doing more than they can actually do at once. So Adebayo, is that sort of answered the question that you were asking earlier?
Yeah, I think that's clearly addressed it.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
No problems. So software like this is very useful to help plan projects, particularly when you start to have a lot of tasks, because you can use the software to record all of the durations of the tasks, all of the estimates, and all of the interdependencies between the tasks and all of the resources that are assigned to the tasks. And you can use the tools within the software to see where you have overcommitment of resource. And if you see something like this, well, what you have to do is find a way to solve the problem. And that might involve moving tasks around. It might involve creating some extra dependencies so that tasks can't start until the resource needed for them is available. And there are different software tools provide different ways of doing this. Some are better than others. And it's the sort of thing where you need to practice on a small project, and this making a cup of tea example is a good example to start with, because it only has 12 tasks. But there are interdependencies between the tasks, and there are resources that can be assigned, and there are different durations for the tasks. So you can play around with the software tool and a simple example like this to be able to see how the tool works and how to use the tool to best advantage. So that's really the end of the activity-based planning module. So if you're okay, I'll close down this software tool. I'm not going to save this project, and I'm going to go back to our exercise. So this was our exercise to plan the project of delivering a cup of tea for our boss using activity-based planning. We made sure we understood the scenario, so we've understood the problem. We've developed an approach, which was we're going to make the cup of tea in the kitchen using the milk, the sugar, the kettle that's in the kitchen. We're not going to go out to the town, to a cafe to buy it. We've developed a list of high-level tasks, such as we need boiling water, we need a cup, we need tea bags, we need to add the boiling water to the cup, we need to brew the tea, we need to deliver the tea. And we've broken those tasks down into more levels of detail so that we can plan effectively. We've put them into a software tool. We've estimated how long each task will take, and we've added the dependencies between tasks to show when things can start and when they can't start. And using the software tool, we were able to see exactly how long the project would take. It was going to take 13 minutes, according to the tool, for us to deliver the cup of tea to the boss. So that's activity-based planning for you. As I say, it's a very old method of planning. What's happened in the 20th century is really the introduction of software and some science to it to help us plan the work better. But at the end of the day, you need subject matter experts who understand the work that needs to be done and how that work might break down into smaller and smaller tasks. If you don't have that knowledge yourself of how the work breaks down, you will need to find subject matter experts that can tell you, right, if you want to build a bridge, these are the main stages in building a bridge. This is how the first stage breaks down. This is how the second stage breaks down. So you may need to find subject matter experts, and you may need more than one subject matter expert. You might need an expert in designing foundations to design the foundations. You may need an expert on designing bridge superstructures to design the bridge superstructure. So all of that is something that as project managers, we have to decide who knows what the activities are going to be, who knows what they're going to break down into, who can help us estimate how long these tasks will take, who can tell us what tasks need to wait for other tasks to be finished before they can start, and which tasks can start immediately, assuming we have enough resource to do so. Because if we don't have enough resource, we have to move those tasks out somehow so that we are not over committing our resource and expecting somebody to do the work of 2 people in one day. So, are there any questions on activity-based planning before we wrap up? Okay.
Hi, Sunday.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm just gonna listen to it again. I might have a question, but I'm not too sure of that question concerning this the example with the tea bags and
yeah.
So I just need to listen to it again.
Sure. Okay.
I
That's
know
fine.
I have a question, but because I'm at work, I couldn't really,
Sure.
know. So yeah. Sure. So
okay.
maybe on the next lesson, yeah.
Yeah. So you're welcome to ask me either via Telegram or on the next lesson if you can talk. The next lesson is going to be on something called product-based planning. So,
Okay.
so product-based planning is a different method of planning, and it's a method of planning that was particularly promoted as part of Print2. And it takes a slightly different approach, although there are some similarities, but Print2 maintains there are some benefits and some advantages to using product-based planning over using activity-based planning. So we'll talk about that next week, and we'll actually plan this same exercise. We'll do the same exercise of delivering a cup of tea, but next week we'll do it using product-based planning.
All right.
So you'll be able to see the difference, and you'll be able to ask any questions about the activity-based planning then. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. So the assignment, you're going to post it on Telegram or?
Yeah, so what I'd like to do with the assignment is have you review the recording on YouTube tomorrow to get the details of the assignment. I can go back to the assignment briefly now if you'd like. Because it was this assignment here. It was to plan a special birthday party by identifying the main tasks involved in preparing a birthday party, listing those main tasks in this table in column 2, and then breaking those main tasks down into lower level tasks that also need to be done, and then continuing to break down those tasks until you have 3 levels and until you have no more than 16 tasks. And once you have those 16 tasks, to then estimate how long each low level task will take and identify the predecessors of each task. So identify what earlier tasks have to be finished before the later tasks can be started. So that's the assignment. So if you're okay, I'd ask you to look at that on YouTube tomorrow and prepare a table like this in a Word document and deliver that back to the Google Drive for admin@knowledgepool.co.uk. Is that okay?
Thank you very much, Tony.
Yes, Tony. Thank you very
much. Me from